Good evening. It's Wednesday, October 28th. It is 8:30. Tonight's plan is to spend our time in our evening tonight talking about the idea of hope and looking at and exploring how hope can impact where we are in the midst of our current situation and circumstances. My name is Greg Krausz. I have been a substance use counselor and now a facility director for about the last 26 years. I am currently residing in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and am looking forward to talking about this topic. It is one that is very important to me, and hopefully for all of us who are here and who are attending the next hour in the discussion, and those who will be watching what we talk about tonight later, will find some benefit of this, because in the midst of what we have been experiencing for the last 6 months or so, it may have been difficult. It may be difficult for us to figure out and find out where hope is and where it comes from for us. We have been through the issue of COVID and the pandemic, and it has changed just about everything you could think of for all of us in our personal lives, in our professional lives, impacted our children if we have children. And as a result of going through everything we've gone through, sometimes it feels really hard to see where the hope is in the midst of all our circumstances. I very intentionally chose the topic and identifying it as developing hope, because as we talk about tonight, a field of psychology called positive psychology believes that by our thoughts and our actions that we can influence, create hope, and hold on to it, even in the midst of really, really difficult, challenging circumstances. Hope is not about us as people having blind optimism and just saying, well, great, everything's going to work out. Sometimes hope is recognizing that even in the midst of challenges, when everything doesn't feel okay to us, that we have the ability to move forward, look at things differently, set realistic goals for ourselves of what we can do and how we can impact things. And so, a lot of us right now are kind of feeling like one of these three pictures, or maybe all of them at the same time. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and she loves anything to do with memes and dealing with them. So I found a couple that I know at different points during the last 6 months, I felt a lot of these things as a person. Not necessarily just as a professional, these things happen, but as a person, it's tiring to be in the midst of all the things that we're dealing with. The impact of COVID, the fact that COVID is impacting our mental health at home, that it's impacting our recovery and people's we know's recovery in the process of it. It leaves us sometimes struggling to sleep with our minds running all over the place with different thoughts about what's going on, what's going to happen, what's coming next, all these different things that are occurring and impacting us as people. Sometimes we just feel tired. It's mentally, physically exhausting. A lot of the staff that I work with at my office for counseling services, they talk about what it's like now to be doing all Zoom sessions with everything, where they don't see people in person. They talk about how it's helped some with attendance, but they also talk about how difficult and challenging and tiring it's been for them to try to adjust to doing everything in a virtual way. The CDC is recently talking about how do we need to deal with important holidays for us as people, like Thanksgiving, and talking about what do we do, what do we need to do. Social media can be full of arguments and disagreements, especially in the midst of the political season and circumstances we're in, with an election about a week away. So many things are tiring. Parents having to deal with work, and now also how do I deal with my kids during the day in school and manage all that. So it's so easy for us to just be worn out and tired and feel stuck and feel like we don't know what's coming next. COVID itself is coming back and increasing recently. So just when we think we have it managed a little bit, we're in a situation and circumstance where we look for, where is the hope? When are things gonna be different, move different, be better? And sometimes we get stuck in this idea that hope and optimism are the same things. They're connected. And hope is more than just that. Little things can often help us see and look at and understand and identify what hope is. And what's interesting, when you try to find a very specific definition for hope, what's kind of interesting is, outside of the positive psychology view we're going to look at in a little bit, one of the things that is most interesting is that the definitions of hope are very, very different. If we lined 20 people up to have an open discussion about define hope, we might get 20 entirely different answers about what that means and what that looks like for them. Some people, it's seeing kind of the light at the end of the tunnel, like the first picture that's on the screen now, where they see a brighter future. They see something different. They see something that they can move towards and get to that will help connect our past with our future in the present. Hope helps us integrate into ourselves as people what we've been through and where we're going into the now is part of what hope does so effectively for us. And we're going to talk towards the end of our conversation and in the last portion of it about some things that we can each do as individuals to increase hope in ourselves and have hope, not just hope in ourselves, but hope about other things. For some people, hope again is like the second picture, where they see that kind of hole, that way out of the current storm and the current struggle and the difficulty, and know that where we are now is not necessarily going to last forever for us, that it's a time that we're struggling and having difficulties and challenges. And one of the great things about this idea of hope, in that we can have an impact on it and grow it in ourselves. One of the things that I think is really, really interesting and exciting about the idea of hope is that we can take action and change and increase it in ourselves. We have some ability to control the idea of hope. Hope is more than wishing. Hope involves recognizing many possible options and possibilities and believing that we have the abilities in ourselves as people to take action on those areas. I tend to like looking at and talking about kind of different mediums when we talk about a topic like hope, and look at some different ways of looking at it. Some of us may be very familiar with Emily Dickinson as a writer and as a poet. I like using quotes in all sorts of things, but this is a relatively short poem that was written by Emily Dickinson, titled "Hope is the Thing with Feathers." And I think it's kind of a nice way to help us to get a little bit of focus on what does hope mean to us, and how do we experience hope. So this is "Hope is the Thing with Feathers" by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could have bashed the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb from me. So much in 3 stanzas, 3 paragraphs, 3 verses of a short poem. Hope is essential to us in human life. In the midst of the storm, the gale, the struggle, hope, like the bird in the poem, tends to be the sweetest for us in the middle of our struggles and difficulties. And one of the great things about this is that hope doesn't ask anything from us. It doesn't require us to feed it, to take care of it. That's where the poet talks about never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. With hope, we can make it through some of the hardest times. And sometimes we just have to listen to the little bird, the little thing that speaks to us, that sings its tune to us. We want to value, and this is what part of what this poem speaks to us about, is that we want to be able to value that we have the capacity to hope, that we have that to hold on. A gentleman named Viktor Frankl wrote a book, Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a survivor of concentration camps in World War II. And he talks often in his book and in other discussions that he has had about the fact that one of the few things that other people cannot take away from us is this idea and this concept of hope, and that hope is a precious resource to us. Our attitude, we can influence and impact. The way we choose to respond to our difficulties and challenges in the midst of grief and loss. We have grief, we have loss, indifferences. One of the things I've heard recently about the pandemic that kind of struck me the most is that all of us are in the same storm in the middle of everything that's happening for us. But we're not in the same boat. Some of us have battleships and are strong and weathering the storm with little issues. Some of us have an inflatable raft with 4 leaks and we just ran out of duct tape in our process. So although we're all experiencing the grief, the loss, the impact of the struggle, it's affecting different ones of us differently. It's not impacting each of us in the same way and the same direction related to it. So I think it's really important for us to recognize and pay attention to the idea that we can hold on to the power of hope in the midst of our difficulties. And we really can have a strong influence on hope ourselves. One of my favorite authors, partly because he wrote the Lord of the Rings series. I love that series of movies, partly because it is all about the topic we're talking about and looking at tonight. The Lord of the Rings movies is finding and holding on to that hope that we can make it, we can push forward, we can get through what we're in with the help of friends and people and higher powers and other things that we connect with that are bigger than ourselves. So many times throughout the Lord of the Rings movies and the books that they were based on, it looks like and feels like and presents and shows us that all hope is lost. Everything's done and finished. There's no way out. And in the midst of all of that, sometimes in the least expected places, like Tolkien's quote says, "Oft hope is born when all is forlorn." Sometimes we experience the most hope when we feel like all is lost and that it's never getting back to where it is. It all is influenced and impacted by the actions that we take as individuals as we look at how and what can we do to create hope. Nelson Mandela, our human compassion binds us the one to the other, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future. I don't know about any of you watching this now and gonna be watching this, but that sounds like an awesome idea to me. That recognizing when we can look at each other and say, oh, you too, me too. I'm not the only one. It's part of the reason that things like 12-step programs and other support groups work for us as people. It's not because we feel bad or people pity us or say, oh, poor you, sympathy kind of stuff. It does it because there's compassion between us as people. Together, we can figure out how our struggles and difficulties can move us towards a better future. Having done lots and lots of work for the last 25 years in the addiction field, I'm very familiar with the 12-step programs and how the 12-step programs work. And if you're not someone in recovery, it is a program that guides us to make the changes we need to in our life to get to a better, healthier place as a person. There's actually been a couple books written about and called the 12 Steps for Everyone. So I honestly think, from my perspective and having been around recovery and talking about it a lot, I absolutely 100% believe that we would all be better people if we chose to and learned to live and implement the 12 steps in our life in the way we lived life. We would be very different as people in how we interacted with others if we did that. One of the things that the 12 steps talk about towards the end of the steps, in the 12th step, it talks about how, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we attempted to give back to other people. That's hope for the future. Because I've been through what I've been through, I can help other people. Another author I really love, Henry Nouwen, who is a spiritual writer, and he wrote a book called The Wounded Healer. He writes from a faith perspective and a spiritual perspective in things. But his idea and his concept is that out of our own woundedness, the places that we've been broken, scarred, challenged, and having difficulties and impacts on our life and from living life, out of our ability to heal from those things that we suffer from, we are capable of being present and helping somebody else heal. What great hope that concept gives us. Out of our challenges, our struggles, our difficulties, we can impact somebody else by what we've learned and experienced from it. Another author talks about Charles Gherkin, and the book, I believe, is out of publication at this point, and the book is called The Living Human Document. Says that all of us are that living human document, each of us as individuals. The past chapters, what we've been through, what we've gone through and experienced, we can't change. They're already written on the pages. What we can choose to do is decide what our past means today in the chapter that we're writing now. We can't know everything that's going to happen in the future chapters. So we have to look at what can we do, what can we influence, how can we increase, create, feed, grow hope in our lives and in ourselves today, because that's where we have control over things. What step can I take today to move towards where I want to be, towards who I want to be, towards what I want to be and do? One of the things you can do to help increase hope in your day is ask yourself in the morning, what is one small thing I can do today to move towards what I want it to be? It doesn't even have to be something huge. It can be a small positive thing that you take a step towards today. The small steps build up and feed each other and become the big steps and big things that we find and we experience as people and individuals. Dr. Judith Rich said, hope is a match in a dark tunnel, a moment of light, just enough to reveal the path ahead and ultimately the way out. So hope grows and fades. It lights it, shows us the way and the path that we're going towards and where we're going. And ultimately, in the long term, that little brief match, that spark in us, leads us to start to identify how to find our way out of where we are. So it's about movement. Sometimes it's about pausing long enough to light that switch, light that match for us so that we can see the path to go down and we can look at the way out from that brief moment of seeing that. Many of us are worn from social distancing, the thing, wearing masks, all the things we have to do to protect other people and ourselves in an unprecedented circumstance that we're all in. A lot of us are worn out and we just keep going and just keep pushing through and get more and more exhausted, stumbling around trying to find the way out in the dark as we're stuck in the midst of a pandemic. Sometimes we have to pause long enough to find the match and to light it. So one of the things that you can do in a positive way to help address and increase and grow hope for yourself is to pause. Do we have moments of silence where we can just pause and say, what I am, where I am is enough. What I am, where I am can help me get to where I am. I have in myself what I need to move closer towards where I want to be. Motivational interviewing, which is a counseling process and way of interacting with people, would call that self-efficacy. The belief and recognition that we often have the answers we need in ourselves, but we need somebody else to help us find it, connect to it, pull it out of us in that process of growing and growth. One of the things to ask yourself and think about in the idea of hope and what it is and what it looks like for you is to stop and take some moments to ask yourself this question. My life has the most meaning, hope, and energy when? And think about what the finish is to that sentence stem. And look at it each day that way. It's a good thing to do in the morning. It's a good thing to do at the evening. And today, what gives you the most meaning, hope, and energy may not be the same thing that the answer to that and the finishing of that is tomorrow or the next day or a week from today. Meaning, hope, and energy are things that help us to be who we are meant to be. So when we answer this question and we think through this question of where the things come from that make me feel that way. I love the question about what has the most energy when I do something. That's your passion. When you get energized by what you're doing, that is speaking to that hope and belief of I can do something, I can be something, I can get somewhere. Hope is directly linked to our spirit as people overall, and looking at how we impact things. So I really recommend to ask yourself this question frequently, because I can almost, as much as possible, my bachelor's degree's in sociology, and one of the first things they taught us in sociology is that you can never say always. But I can pretty close to guarantee you that the things that energize you help you give hope and meaning, and that the things that drain you the most are things that you're doing because you feel a need to do them or have to do them, but don't impact your meaning, hope, and energy very much. Part of what we want to do is start to focus as much as we can as people on the things that give us meaning, hope, and energy in life. From a website called Hope Grows that talks about and wrote an article about why is this even important to us? What's the meaning in the idea of hope? Where does it come from? And part of what they say is everyone hopes for something. So this is not something that some people have and other people don't. Hope is not something that is like a personality trait where you may have it and I don't have it. Everybody has a hope for something and in something. They say it's an inherent part of being a human being. It helps us to define what we want in our futures. And it's part of the self-narrative about our lives we all have running inside our minds. We have that conversation in our heads all the time in terms of the narrative about who we are, what matters, where we want to be, and who we want to be. It helps us set realistic goals for ourselves, and it helps us look at how do we move towards them. Thich Nhat Hanh, who is another very spiritual author and writer and guide for a number of people, says hope is important because it can make the present moment less difficult to bear. If we believe that tomorrow will be better, we can bear a hardship today. So some of what we want to look at is in the time and in the struggle that we're having now with COVID and the change in what we're able to do and how we're able to do it. I don't know about anybody else and their views and what gives them some level and sense of peace. But it is unbelievably hard for me for it to be October and me not to be able to spend Saturday afternoons with 108,000 of my closest friends at a Penn State football game. Yeah, it's awesome we get to watch it on TV, but part of what for me energized me about it and made it so peaceful and calming for me is all the people there. Common purpose, common reason, getting behind the kids on the team, at that level. Now, that's not something that has meaning for everybody, but I believe that at some point, we all will be able to get back and be there. It makes it a little easier to deal with the hardship of today, knowing that that's not something that's likely to be gone forever. And we all have things like that, that if we recognize tomorrow can be different, and I can do something today to influence where tomorrow goes, I may have great hope that things are going to change. So positive psychology talks about hope and gives us a definition that's a little different than what you may read or may see or may experience from reading Webster Dictionary definitions of hope. The Webster and other dictionary definitions of hope tend an awful lot to sound like wishful thinking and optimism. Optimism tends to be an outcome of hope and a view of hope, but they're not necessarily entirely the same things that people experience with it. So positive psychology defines hope as a positive cognitive state based on a sense of successful, goal-directed determination and planning to meet these goals. Initially reading that definition and hearing it may make us feel like that's just a whole bunch of words thrown together in a sentence that don't make a whole lot of sense. But as we break it down and think on it some, positive cognitive state means it has to do with the way we think and how we think as people and as individuals. And it is a state where our thoughts are healthy, good, positive thoughts that we're having, a positive cognitive state. So it's the place we're at in the present and how we're thinking about things. Part of it's based on a sense of successful goal-directed determination. What that's trying to tell us is that we have the belief that we can accomplish goals and take steps towards them. So being able to believe in ourselves, our abilities, our skills, what we have, and recognize that our strengths and what we have inside ourselves can help us move towards the outcome. And we spend time planning to meet the goals. So we have to work on, if we're going to build, increase hope, develop hope, help hope grow in us as individuals and people, we have to work on two parts of it. We have to work on that belief in developing the skills and the things we need to be successful in reaching what we want our tomorrow to look like. And we need to take the time to plan, what am I going to do to get there? And get to that next step and that next state. According to their theory and the way they look at their theory of hope, hope consists of agency and pathways. Those are the two basic areas that we have to work on to develop hope. The person who has hope has the will and determination that the goals will be achieved. So it's the will to get there and different ways to get there. So they look at it and say, okay, we have to look at it and say, you know what, there's different options and different ways that I could get to what I want things to be like. I could do this, I could do this, I could take this path, I could take this path. I could do lots of different things. And I have to have the determination that I can and will achieve those goals if I choose to. And it's a choice. And we can all look at different ways that we could do this and grow that. So he talks about really 3 ways of thinking that help us in hope in Schneider's theory. Goals thinking, clear conceptualization of valuable goals. So what we have to do is part of our thinking to develop, increase, build hope in ourselves as a person and as individuals is we have to determine what goal matters to me, what outcome matters to me, what value is there. The more valuable the goal, the more likely we are to be able to think about strategies to reach it and take the steps to do that. We have to conceptualize what those goals are, which means we have to think through what matters to me, what are my values, and how can I put them into action. They talk about pathways thinking, which is the ability to develop specific strategies to reach the goals. So that's looking at and talking through and thinking through which way can I go, what options do I have, and how can I do that? And agency thinking has to do with the idea of sustaining the motivations so we actually use the strategies. Some of us are very, very good at one of these areas and not so good at the other ones in implementing that. I know for myself, one of the things I'm really, really good at is conceptualizing goals and valuable goals for the agency that I run. I am not necessarily the best at coming up with the strategies to reach those goals and need coworkers who are good at that to help me to build it so that we have the ability to hope that the programs and what we do are going to make the difference. So sometimes we need somebody who's kind of a counterpart to us to help the different areas and the different places and spaces that we get into and wind up struggling with in our thinking. But these are all things that we can impact. We can impact how we think and how we react and respond to our circumstances and situations. So when you look at the idea of and continue to look at what hope is, there's really 4 core beliefs that have to be there for it to be hope. The future will be better than the present. So where I am, what my experience of my struggle is right now, tomorrow, the future, what comes next, does not have to be where I am now. If I struggle with anxiety or depression or other difficulties like that, the future doesn't have to be as controlled by those struggles and difficulties as today is. So there's the belief that what we do, what we impact, the steps we take, the directions that we go in, that we don't have to be stuck in the moment with no way out. There's always pathways to get to somewhere healthier for us. We have to believe that we have the power to make it happen. We all have power. We all have a voice. I've had to correct myself a number of times because I used to talk about how, as a person who is a professional working in counseling, that we had to speak for people who didn't have a voice. I was wrong every time I said that, because the reality is that's not what we need to do. What we need to do is help the person find their voice so that they can use it. We all have a voice. We all have something that we can control and impact in a positive direction. We have to believe that we have that power. There are many paths to my goals. So that's that idea again of which trail am I going to take? Which one is to get there and reach it? There is never only one pathway to hope, health, healing, and positive things in the future. Even with recovery from substance use or mental health concerns, there is not just one way to fix it and move through it and manage it. In my process, there's lots of ways to get there. And then the other thing we have to acknowledge is that there's really no easy way. All the easy problems have been fixed in our experience and what we deal with and go through. There is no pathway to that better future that I have power to make it happen. There's not one of those ways where we as a person are going to be able to say, there's no obstacles, there's nothing that could get in the way. I'm going to wait till the obstacle-free pathway comes. Every single path that we choose to take has obstacles, and it's okay. Sometimes the obstacles are what help us grow and be and become healthier people. So as we're looking at how to develop hope in our daily life, and how do we develop hope in the midst of the pandemic, one of the things that we want to do, and some of it's asking ourselves again, pause, take the time to choose to focus on one or some of these questions. Because asking ourselves these questions, some of us may like to journal it and write down the answers to these questions, and maybe write down the answer to the same question for a month or a week. Some of us may want something different and don't like that same routine, so ask different questions of ourselves to help develop hope. What was good about today? Oftentimes, where do we get ourselves stuck as people? Many, many times, we focus on and struggle with and get stuck in the stuff that went wrong and got off track, and don't choose to look at what was good about today. Even in our worst days, there is something good there, and seeing that helps us look at that hope for a better tomorrow. What is there to be truly thankful for about today? This gets back to actually what I presented a couple weeks ago in these webinars on gratitude, and the idea that gratitude helps us be more hopeful. So what is there to be thankful for? We have to take the time to think about it ourselves, because unfortunately, the news and other media may not be focusing us on what to be thankful for and have hope in, but may be much more likely to get us to focus on the negative, the things to fear, what's next, what's going to go wrong next, what do we have to be scared about. We have to look at what's going on today. If we struggle with that, we can ask ourselves, how have I grown as a person today? So a lot of times our struggles, our challenges help us grow as a person. And then, looking at how have I grown as a person today, we can then say, okay, what's good about how I've grown? And think about what that tells us. That starts to build up those other pieces of hope where I have the belief that I can influence it and I have options and possibilities because I can see that I've changed today and that there's good things about it. What positive events or circumstances are making me hopeful about the future? It could be little things. It could be big things. Some people may think I'm kind of crazy, and the people who know me really well know that I am in a lot of ways, a little bit off center of a lot of things. But one of the things that gives me great hope about the future is that I come home from work, and whether I had an awesome day or a terrible day, my little dog Jamocha jumps up and down and barks at me and gets all excited that I'm home. I could have messed up 30 things during work, and the little dog is excited and happy that I'm home. So I know that no matter what, I'm going to get that response when I walk in the door. And it lets me know that it's okay to have a bad day, and that it's not always going to be that way, and that somebody is always going to think at some point, I'm all right and I'm going to be okay there in that. Other things to ask yourself, and this first question kind of comes from therapeutic communities in terms of treatment and counseling. In your opinion, what does a hopeful person look and sound like? If we're not a generally hopeful person and we have to do a lot of work as people to figure out what hope is, maybe we could benefit from finding a person who is really hopeful and figuring out how they do it. How do they live in that space of hope? We have to look at and think about, how have you used hope in our own life? Are there any risks with having hope? And the answer to that question is yes. We could turn it into just wishing for something if we don't take action. We could hope for something and it not turn out the way we wanted it to. I actually love this question, and when I am live and in person with people, I get some really interesting answers to this. If a picture on your wall could remind you of hope every morning, what would that picture be? So if you had a framed picture that would encapsulate and remind you of what hope is and looks like for you, what would that be? And when we look at that image and meditate on that image and think about that, it starts to create hope in us. And then this other question is great too, because a lot of times we set ourselves up as human beings for struggles and problems because we try to do too big of a thing too fast without breaking it down into small enough pieces. So some of what we want to look at and think about is what's the smallest change that could increase hope? The smallest. Maybe some of you have seen the motivational poster with the kind of drop of water hitting the bigger body of water and all the ripples going out. What is that small drop that you could make in that change that's going to lead you to be able to increase your hope and do things and do those types of things more as you move towards the future and that difference? Belief.net is a website, made a list for us of things that we could do to increase hope for ourselves and develop it. Be kind to yourself. A lot of us as human beings and people are really, really good at beating ourselves up. And we need to show compassion and gentleness towards ourselves as people and recognize the good in ourselves and be kind to us in our daily practice. I like this idea, even though it's difficult. Create a daily 5-minute silence ritual. Just take 5 minutes where you're shut off from media, electronics, conversation, noise, TV, radio, and take just 5 minutes out of your day. And you will be surprised how that 5 minutes of silence is going to help you develop hope that things can change. I've mentioned the news and the news media, and I could probably talk for days about my views of some of the impact that media has on us as people from a mental health perspective. But limit how much news you watch in a day. Make decisions on how much you're going to look at it and think about it and deal with it. Approach each day like it's a gift. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. We have today that we can do something with. So make it something meaningful, impactful. Take a break, take a vacation, take a day off. Do something to get away from it all. Kind of like the whole Calgon Take Me Away commercials that used to be on TV. Express love tangibly. This means put it into action. One of the things they talk about in the article that made this list is that to express love tangibly, they talked about hugging people and things like that. I know that's a little more challenging based on the guidance and guidelines we've been given to work with, but put your love of people into action in your words, in the way you talk to them, in the way you're present with them. Repeat to yourself over and over again the statement. And boy, what an impact this can make on us with everything going on systemically and problematically that way. I am the key to peace. Don't we all just want a little bit of peace and peace and calm in life? Use the short statement, I'm the key to peace, and make a difference. Do something that's going to change and make a difference in a small way to somebody. When it comes to setting goals for ourselves, we want them to be specific, not real generalized things. We need them to be measurable so that we know that we're achieving them. We want our goals to be action-oriented. What steps am I going to take? They have to be realistic. We can't decide we're going to be emperor of the universe, because for most of us, that's not really a realistic idea. And our goals have to be time-bound, meaning they have to have a start and end point. They talk about this concept as SMART goals. So as you set goals for increasing your hope and developing your hope, what you want to do is follow those types of concepts of setting those SMART goals for yourself. I want to close with a quote again from J.R.R. Tolkien. There is some good in this world and it's worth fighting for. That can help us with hope to see where there's good in the world, and be able to recognize it and share it and experience it. I hope that our conversation tonight and the webinar was helpful for those of you watching now and watching in the future. My hope is that something tonight will have impacted you and that you have found something to help you grow your hope moving forward. Thank you. Have a great night. And those of you watching in the future, have a great